Hello, I'm Haslinda Amin, anchor with Bloomberg Television. Thank you for joining us. We're almost 2 years into COVID-19, yet half of the world's 1.4 billion students are still affected by school closures, and that may have long-term implications on an entire generation. UNESCO estimates that more than 100 million additional children will fall below the minimum proficiency level in reading. Add to that mental health stresses and also cases of exploitation. So how do we avert a lost generation? Nadiem Makarim is Indonesia's Minister of Education, Culture, Research and Technology. Prior to that, he was an entrepreneur, founder of Gojek. Nadiem Makarim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. How are you, Haslinda?
I'm good. Speaking of education in Indonesia, 60 million students in Indonesia have been impacted by school closures. About 40% or so are now back in classrooms. What are you seeing in terms of the impact so far?
Well, I think to date, about a little bit more than that, about 55% are back in school with strict health protocols. The impact, we still have yet to see. Time will tell. Initial preliminary research has shown, like, for example, from the World Bank, that we've lost anywhere from 8 months to over a year in total learning time on average. That is a very serious number for an educational system. And what's really interesting is that the impact is not even. It depends on actually where you are, so where in the economic strata you are, which areas or regions that have more connectivity or less connectivity, as well as your age. The younger you are, the bigger the impact of that loss of learning. Outside of the loss of learning, we're dealing with a lot of different complications with psychological health. We're getting an epidemic of loneliness in kids, right? Many of them are, addicted to gadgets now in many unhealthy ways. So some are dealing with domestic violence and so on. And some of the kids have stopped going to school, whereas disproportionately are women. So we want to make sure that kind of deterioration stops immediately. So for the past 8 months, I have been fighting for reopening of schools as quickly and also as safely as possible. But restarting that process, and this is to all the other governments around the world, is not that easy when you've got a bunch of decentralized systems and local governments that are still quite traumatized from their experience of COVID when the Delta variant went through. So that is the biggest challenge right now. We have to get these kids back to school.
You alluded to this, reports of exploitation at home, worrying increase in child marriage, child violence since the start of the pandemic and the school closures. Some are also needing to work after their parents lost their jobs. Give us some perspective of how bad it's looking.
Well, the good part is that we're seeing a lot of those kids that have left school have returned when school is face-to-face. So with a lot of especially the private schools that have tuition that are in the poorer areas. So we have a lot of private schools that are for the poorer segments of our society in Indonesia. And you have to pay tuition for that. A lot of the parents refused to pay tuition or were unable to pay tuition because of the economic crisis, and they didn't feel that the value of online learning was good for their children. So what we are seeing is a return back, which is good news for those that have allowed to resume face-to-face learning. But we won't know until we do the research 1 year ahead. We are right now in the process of measuring numeracy and literacy on a nationwide scale. So for the first time, Indonesia is plugged into the international standard. We're using a kind of a version of PISA for our national assessment in order to assess how big the learning loss is and which schools need the biggest help from the government. So I'm pretty confident that for the most part, the psychological issues will be addressed. I have 3 daughters that had to stop school. They're all under 5. And it has been a tremendous psychological benefit to return back to school for them. I see it in their behavior and their attitude. And so all parents are experiencing the same thing where it's very stressful for a child to be at home. So we cannot tell until later research to really determine how far this will impact them permanently. But it's not looking good for online learning. So the first and foremost priority has got to be get back to face-to-face learning. And then there's a bunch of other policies to catch up to.
We know Indonesia is a vast archipelago. I'm just wondering, how successful has remote learning been? How accessible has it been to the students in the country?
Well, we've got areas of the country that do not have access to internet, but also those areas that do have access, a lot of them have intermittent access or very slow access. So when you're dealing with Zoom classes, right? When you're dealing with video conferencing technology, obviously the bandwidth matters a lot. So just internet access is a poor proxy of assessing how good online learning has been. The inner cities, the big cities where most of the population of Indonesia, they are relatively, were able to do online learning. But even then, the learning method and process is not optimized yet. It's impossible to get, not just Indonesia, anywhere in the world, for kids, teachers, and parents to adapt to a new system over the period of a year. It takes decades to adapt to a new method. So it's definitely taken a toll in learning loss. For certain areas in the outer regions, a lot of those kids were just not able to continue education for extended periods of time, which is why we made sure to push for regions that had those internet blind spots to immediately go to face-to-face learning. Now, what the positive side of this, if I could say that, even though there are very few positive sides, the net effect of the pandemic has been disastrous for the whole world. But there are some positive developments that have been caused by COVID. One is that if we wanted to, there would be no way that we could train 5 million teachers and professors how to use technology in education. Even if we tried, it would have taken years and years, even decades, to achieve the kind of adoption of technology that we're seeing now across teachers, across all areas of Indonesia. So that will have permanent positive effects of how even face-to-face learning is innovated and conducted once all kids return back to school. The second part that we've seen is the participation of parents. We have yet to see this trend of parents actually caring enough about the curriculum, about their student learning, as during the pandemic. So we're seeing this trend of a return of parents actually being far more proactively involved in their children's education. And third thing is it has woken up governments around the world. Indonesia are accelerating at full steam ahead in connecting all the villages that did not have access to internet and increasing bandwidth there. We are launching one of the biggest programs called the School Digitalization Program, where we are going to be spending a very large budget in providing laptops, Wi-Fi routers, and projector screens to schools in the most remote areas of Indonesia. So the acceleration that these gaps in inequality has shown us during the pandemic has also had a great wake-up effect to governments everywhere and to the private and social sector to actually fill in these gaps and catch up. For example, Haslinda, we would not have had the momentum of being able to change the curriculum into something that is much simpler, more flexible, if it weren't for COVID. Now it's very clear that to play catch up, we simply need a curriculum that is much more flexible, much more focusing on foundational skills, numeracy, literacy, collaboration, creative problem solving, in order to actually play catch up. We would not have had that mandate without COVID. So the silver lining in all of this is that reform has become accelerated greatly due to the pandemic.
Before we become the issue of digitalization, reform, and curriculum, what do you make of how do we play catch up? I mean, what kind of support is needed, not just for students, but teachers to play catch up? I mean, these are 2 long years.
Yeah. So I think first, they need the equipment. They need internet access. They need to be able to at least have access to the greatest mentors in their field, access to the latest curriculum, content, textbooks, videos that will help them teach. That's kind of the first equalizer. It's not the most important equalizer, but it's the first equalizer. The second part to play catch up is you need to have a curriculum that is designed for the teacher, not a curriculum made just by administrators or by the ministry. Curriculum by teachers for teachers. This means one very important thing, to be able to move down and up as each teacher sees fit. This is such an important concept whereby you can personalize and segmentize which level of competency you want at every level. Some schools or some classrooms may be 2 years behind, and it should be okay for teachers to go back there and start from a lower base. Some schools and some classes may be 1 or 2 years ahead in particular subjects as well. So a flexible curriculum that is based on the competency and the interests of the children in the classroom, that freedom needs to be given to the teachers, and technology plays a pivotal role in enabling that. Then finally, the most important piece of this puzzle is the human element. One thing that the pandemic has shown us is that there is no substitute for human talent as teachers in our schools. This has been, there was a debate before, right, about whether AI is going to replace teachers. That will continue forever a myth. It is not true. Face-to-face learning and the emotional connection that teachers and students have is a key formative part of the learning process. And so having quality teachers, how do we move the best teachers to go and help teachers in areas that have the lowest achievement scores in literacy and numeracy? How do we create incentive structures, financial and career-wise, for teachers to allow them to move to these areas that need the most talent and to play catch up? So we've done a bunch of different things. The first time this year that we multiplied school funding based on poverty index, essentially. So that's the first time where a student in Papua, Irian Jaya, the schools there are given much more than a school in Jakarta, the capital. So these kind of affirmative policies need to transcend across all factors: budgeting, manpower planning, curriculum flexibility. All of these attacked as one, that will play catch up. One of the biggest programs we just launched, we sent 30,000 university students to spend a whole semester in elementary schools and middle schools in the most outer remote regions to help the teachers catch up, because they can't do one-on-one tutoring. So these university students, smart, talented, socially oriented university students, we're sending them, and next year it's going to be even bigger number. So we're sending in reinforcements from campuses all across Indonesia to help do the one-on-one coaching, the one-on-one mentoring and tutoring for the students to play catch up. So it's a combination of all these factors.
Is that enough, you think, to bridge the digital divide?
Well, time will tell. Time will tell. I do believe that that connectivity will become a prerequisite, but the most important thing, I think, and what gives me the most optimism is the sheer interest in technology in the education sector right now. We're seeing innovations that we've never seen. The ministry itself, we're one of the first ministries to have a team of ex-unicorns. We have a world-class engineering team now that are building apps for free. So we're building our own super app, but for education, for the principals, for the teachers, and for the administrators to observe our new test scores, to bring personalized and segmented learning, to bring the latest micro-learning. So we're building like a MOOC for teachers, an online self-led university, a digital university for teachers to upgrade their competencies. So all of this is coming and bringing a lot of optimism, I believe. And when I go and I spend a lot of nights, I spend nights at teachers' houses all across Indonesia. I try to do that on every one of my trips. And it's just amazing the level of motivation and the level of care, even in the most remote areas, for change in the education system. So at the end of the day, this cannot just be policy. At the end of the day, Merdeka Belajar, our kind of overall campaign program for emancipated learning, it must be a movement. It cannot just be a policy. It's got to be a grassroots movement, and that's what we're driving in every part of Indonesia right now.
You talk about it being a movement, you talk about reform. Could we be looking at learning anywhere, anytime, with 5G becoming more prevalent?
I think eventually hybrid models will begin to take shape. I think that primarily learning will be a face-to-face activity. As we get to older ages and maturity, I think the component of online learning or distance learning will become greater and greater, and it will add more flexibility. In higher education, we're already seeing that. But the face-to-face component will be mixed in with the technology. So a lot of people have this misperception about how technology and education is about remote learning. Well, remote learning was a forced upon consequence of the pandemic. These two things and adoption of technology in education are two separate things, and we have to separate them. So what I do believe is that there will be lots of different permutations of hybrid models, whereby for example, the flipped classroom, whereby students are absorbing content at home and then they're coming into class to discuss their projects with their teachers, or to do presentations, or to do problem sets guided by their teachers. So there's going to be a lot of this flipped classroom, hybrid learning permutations that I think will be very good. But the key point is that that cannot be mandated by the government as a central authority. Those innovations must be given, the government must give room for schools, individual schools, to do those innovations when they're ready and according to the needs and wants of their students and their teachers.
Minister, the pandemic is a reminder that the skills students need are not static. I mean, creative, problem solving, adaptability. How are you looking at the future of education and how that needs to evolve?
Well, the first thing we did when we began this reform, emancipated learning, is we set the type of profile that we needed. And within that profile, the key elements of that profile, one is actually spirituality and morality. Then we've got independence or growth mindset, self-driven. We've got creativity. We have collaboration, the ability to collaborate. And these are, and of course, global citizenship. And these 6 elements are the new kind of explicit goals of the education system. Now, how do you expect to achieve that when we don't include elements that are project-based? When you don't include activities or give sufficient amount of time for students to work together with each other to achieve a common goal? How are they supposed to learn about creativity when they are not asked to produce things, when their assessments are all based on test grades and not instead of portfolio? How do we expect our students to have an immense sense of problem solving and critical thinking when they are not actually solving problems and being challenged to solve problems? So I think that the 6 profiles that we highlighted before as our overarching goal become the framework by which we're changing curriculum, we're changing teacher training, we're changing technology solutions in order to push those 6 kind of profiles of our student that we want them to have when they leave the education system and join this new economy, which is rapidly changing. So it's going to be a skills and competencies-based economy. It's not going to be an information-defined economy. It's going to be skills and the ability to manipulate and process information and do things with it. And so that's where the education system needs to shift in training that ability in kids. And the most important part of all is developing the growth mindset, the ability and the willingness for children to want to learn for the rest of their lives, to want to read, to want to seek knowledge and teach themselves over and over again throughout their lifetime. And that's why schools have got to be fun. That's why schools have to be associated with having a good time, because without that, kids will always be traumatized and associate school with something, and learning, because school is tied to learning, associate that with negative feelings and emotions. So we have to make schools flexible, relevant, but we also have to make them fun and engaging. This is so key, because what matters is when they leave, they're going to have to teach themselves how and relearn every 5 years, every 10 years, because the world is changing so quickly.
Indonesia has a young population. We often talk about its demographic dividend. To what extent do you think that is being threatened? Might that be a risk to the economy, given what's happened, what's transpired in this pandemic?
Yeah, I think you could see it both ways. Both views are equally valid. You can see it as a bonus. You can see it also as a liability. And really, that all depends on what happens in two sides. Are we able to bring enough and quickly enough transformation in our education system, bring flexibility within it and relevancy and engagement within it. And on the other side is our economy. Can we create enough jobs? Are there enough opportunities, investment, job opportunities? And are there enough, because frankly speaking, with a population of our size, and most large countries suffer the same problem, there will never be enough jobs for all the college graduates that come out. So we have to create a higher education system that actually trains to build self-employed entrepreneurs, to create jobs, not just become a worker in a job. So it really does, whether this becomes a liability or a bonus, really depends on those two sides of the formula. Can we train our human capital talent effectively and relevant enough? And can we boost our economy to create jobs quickly enough? It's really two sides of that equation. It can't be just one side. You know, we've never seen anywhere in the world, there's a reason why countries with low GDP per capita, we've never seen one with an incredible education system. It doesn't work. Those go hand in hand. There's a natural cap to overall wealth creation in the country, increasing welfare in the country with educational outcomes. Those things are interlinked.